This is the story of how a woman's cruelty toward innocent children became the very weapon that destroyed her life completely. This tale of manipulation, abuse, and ultimate justice will show you that sometimes the most satisfying revenge comes from simply allowing someone to face the consequences of their own evil actions. It all started when I was 8 years old, and my father married Patricia, a woman who seemed like a fairy tale stepmother at first but turned out to be our worst nightmare. My father, Robert, was a successful businessman who had been widowed when my mother died in a car accident 2 years earlier. He was raising me and my younger brother Tommy, who was only 6, as a single father and doing his best to give us the love and stability we needed during such a difficult time. Patricia entered our lives like a whirlwind of charm and sweetness. She was beautiful, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in becoming a mother figure to Tommy and me. She would bring us gifts, take us on special outings, and tell my father how much she loved having us in her life. My father, who was lonely and struggling to balance work with single parenthood, fell head over heels in love with this woman who seemed too good to be true. And she was too good to be true, but not in the way any of us expected. The transformation began almost immediately after the wedding. Patricia, who had been sweet and loving during their courtship, began to show her true colors once she had secured her position as my father's wife. The gifts stopped coming, the special outings became rare, and the woman who had claimed to love us began treating us like unwanted burdens in her new home. Patricia's strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. She never abused us in front of my father or other adults. Instead, she waited for moments when we were alone with her to show us who she really was. She would make cutting remarks about our appearance, our intelligence, and our behavior. She would tell us that we were disappointments to our father, that we reminded him too much of our dead mother, and that we were holding him back from being truly happy. The psychological warfare was systematic and devastating. Patricia would give us chores that were impossible for children our age to complete perfectly, then punish us severely when we failed to meet her unrealistic standards. She would make rules that changed constantly, ensuring that we were always breaking some arbitrary regulation that justified her anger and punishment. When my father was home, Patricia would put on an Academy Award-worthy performance as the loving stepmother. She would speak to us sweetly in front of him, offer to help with our homework, and present herself as the devoted wife who was doing everything possible to help his children adjust to their new family dynamic. But the moment my father left for work or stepped out of the room, the mask would come off and the real Patricia would emerge. The isolation began gradually. Patricia would suggest to my father that Tommy and I needed more structure and discipline. She convinced him that we were acting out because we had been spoiled, and that what we really needed was firm boundaries and consequences for our behavior. My father, who trusted his new wife completely and was grateful for her willingness to help parent his children, began to defer to her judgment on matters concerning Tommy and me. Patricia used this trust to systematically separate us from our father. She would schedule family activities during times when Tommy and I had other commitments, then tell my father that we had chosen not to participate because we were being difficult. She would intercept phone calls from our friends, telling them we were grounded or unavailable, then tell us that nobody had called because we were not well-liked. She would volunteer us for extra chores or punishments during times when our father wanted to spend quality time with us, then explain to him that we had misbehaved and needed to learn responsibility. The financial manipulation was perhaps the most insidious aspect of Patricia's plan. She convinced my father that Tommy and I were becoming entitled and materialistic, and that it would be better for our character development if we learned to work for everything we wanted. Our allowances were eliminated. Our participation in extracurricular activities was drastically reduced, and requests for new clothes or school supplies were met with lectures about the value of money and the importance of gratitude. Meanwhile, Patricia was living a life of luxury. She had a credit card with no limit, a new car every 2 years, and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She joined expensive country clubs, took elaborate vacations with my father, and redecorated our home to eliminate any trace of our mother's presence or our childhood memories. The most devastating part of Patricia's campaign was how she turned our father against us. She would provoke arguments between Tommy and me, then present these sibling conflicts to our father as evidence that we were becoming violent and uncontrollable. She would create situations where we would inevitably fail or misbehave, then document these failures as proof that we needed more severe consequences and restrictions. Patricia had a particular talent for making us look bad in front of our father. She would ask us to do something, then change the instructions while we were completing the task, ensuring that we would do it wrong. She would promise us something, then tell our father that she had never made such a promise and that we were lying to manipulate him. She would create emergencies that required our father's immediate attention during important moments in our lives, ensuring that he would miss school plays, sporting events, and other milestones. The breaking point came when I was 13 and Tommy was 11. Patricia convinced our father that we needed to attend boarding school because we were becoming too difficult to manage at home and were negatively influencing each other. She presented this as a sacrifice she was willing to make for our own good, telling our father that she loved us so much that she was willing to give up the joy of having us in the house if it meant we would receive the structure and education we needed. Our father, who had been systematically conditioned to believe that Tommy and I were problems that needed to be solved, agreed to send us away. We spent the next 4 years at a strict boarding school, coming home only for brief visits during holidays and summer breaks. During these visits, Patricia made sure that our time at home was so unpleasant that we would actually look forward to returning to school. The isolation from our father became complete during our boarding school years. Patricia would intercept our letters and phone calls, editing our communications to make us sound ungrateful and demanding. She would tell our father that we only contacted him when we wanted money, and that we had made it clear that we preferred life at school to life at home. She convinced him that the distance was actually good for our relationship, and that we would appreciate him more once we matured. Meanwhile, Patricia was working on securing her own future. She convinced our father to change his will, arguing that it was unfair to leave everything to children who clearly resented him and wanted nothing to do with their family. She suggested that the bulk of his estate should go to her, with small trust funds for Tommy and me that would be distributed only if we maintained respectful relationships with our stepmother and proved that we had become responsible adults. Patricia also convinced our father to put all of his assets in joint accounts with her, ostensibly to make it easier for her to manage household expenses and financial planning. She argued that this would also protect the family's wealth in case Tommy and I ever tried to make legal claims against the estate. Our father, who had been thoroughly convinced that his children were potential threats to his happiness and security, agreed to these arrangements without question. The years passed, and Tommy and I grew up essentially as orphans despite having a living father. We learned to depend on each other, and to create our own family unit separate from the people who were supposed to love and care for us. We worked part-time jobs to pay for things we needed, applied for scholarships to pay for college, and built lives that did not depend on the family that had rejected us. I excelled in school and went on to study business and law, driven by a determination to never be powerless or vulnerable again. Tommy became an engineer, brilliant and successful in his own right. We both married wonderful people who loved us and created families of our own. Families where children were cherished and protected rather than manipulated and discarded. Our father's health began to decline when I was in my early 30s. He had developed heart problems and diabetes, conditions that required ongoing medical care and lifestyle changes. Patricia, who had spent 20 years presenting herself as the devoted wife, began to show her true priorities when caring for a sick husband became inconvenient and expensive. Patricia started complaining to our father about the cost of his medical care and the impact his illness was having on their social life. She would make cutting remarks about his appearance and energy level, comparing him unfavorably to other men their age who were healthier and more active. She began taking separate vacations, claiming that she needed breaks from the stress of caring for an invalid. The mask was finally coming off, but it was too late for our father to see clearly. He had become so dependent on Patricia and so isolated from Tommy and me that he had no support system beyond the woman who was now showing him the same cruelty she had shown us for decades. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning when I was at work. It was Patricia, and she was crying hysterically. Our father had suffered a massive heart attack and was in intensive care. The doctors were not sure if he would survive, and if he did, he would need extensive care and rehabilitation. I rushed to the hospital. my heart breaking for the father I had loved despite everything that had happened between us. Tommy flew in from across the country, and we spent days in the waiting room, hoping and praying that our father would recover enough for us to have one final conversation with him. Our father did survive, but he was severely weakened and would need months of rehabilitation and ongoing medical care. The man who had once been strong and successful was now frail and dependent, requiring assistance with basic daily activities and constant medical supervision. This is when Patricia's true nature became visible to everyone around her. The moment it became clear that our father would be a burden rather than a provider, Patricia began making plans to abandon him. She started talking about how she was too young to spend the rest of her life caring for an invalid, how she deserved better than being trapped in a marriage to someone who could no longer give her the lifestyle she wanted. Patricia's selfishness became impossible to hide when she began pressuring our father to sign documents that would give her complete control over all of his assets and release her from any legal obligation to provide for his care. She wanted to put him in a nursing home and move to Florida, where she could start fresh with her freedom and his money. The doctors and social workers at the hospital were appalled by Patricia's behavior. They had never seen a spouse so eager to abandon their partner during a medical crisis, and they began to ask questions about our father's family support system. This is when Tommy and I learned the full extent of Patricia's financial manipulation over the years. We discovered that Patricia had systematically transferred our father's assets into accounts that she controlled exclusively. She had changed his will multiple times, eventually leaving Tommy and me with virtually nothing while ensuring that she would inherit everything. She had convinced him to purchase life insurance policies that named her as the sole beneficiary, and she had been systematically liquidating his investments and retirement accounts for years. But Patricia had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She had assumed that Tommy and I would remain the broken, powerless children she had driven away years earlier. She had not counted on us becoming successful, resourceful adults who were capable of fighting back when necessary. When Patricia approached us with her plan to put our father in a state-funded nursing home while she moved to Florida with his money, she expected us to be grateful that she was even informing us of her decision. She had spent so many years treating us as insignificant that she genuinely believed we would remain irrelevant to the situation. Instead, Tommy and I presented Patricia with an alternative plan. We would take full responsibility for our father's care, bringing him to live with one of us and ensuring that he received the best possible medical treatment and rehabilitation. In exchange, Patricia would return the assets she had taken from our father and agree to a divorce settlement that left her with a reasonable, but not excessive amount of money. Patricia laughed at our proposal. She told us that we had no legal standing, no financial resources to fight her, and no relationship with our father that would give us any influence over his decisions. She was confident that she held all the cards and that Tommy and I were still the powerless children she remembered. This is when Patricia learned that the children she had spent years destroying had grown up to become formidable adversaries. Tommy and I had spent months quietly investigating Patricia's financial activities and building a case that would expose the extent of her manipulation and abuse. We had documented evidence of financial elder abuse, coercion, and fraud. We had testimonies from doctors and social workers who had witnessed Patricia's abandonment of our father during his medical crisis. We had records showing how she had systematically isolated him from his children and anyone else who might have questioned her actions. Most importantly, we had our father's medical team on our side. The doctors who had been treating him were so disturbed by Patricia's behavior that they were willing to testify that she was emotionally abusing a vulnerable patient, and that her actions were detrimental to his recovery and well-being. The legal battle that followed was swift and decisive. Patricia, who had spent years manipulating a vulnerable man and had never expected to face consequences for her actions, was completely unprepared for the fight that Tommy and I brought to her doorstep. Her lawyers quickly realized that her position was indefensible and advised her to accept a settlement rather than face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. The settlement stripped Patricia of most of the assets she had stolen from our father over the years. She was forced to return his retirement accounts, investments, and personal property. She was left with a modest amount of money and the requirement that she stay away from our father permanently. But losing the money was not the worst part of Patricia's downfall. The legal proceedings had exposed her true nature to everyone in their social circle. Friends and neighbors who had admired her for years as the devoted wife learned that she had been financially and emotionally abusing her husband, while systematically destroying his relationship with his children. The country club friends who had envied her lifestyle discovered that she had been living off money she had stolen from a man she was supposed to love and protect. Patricia's reputation in the community was destroyed completely. The woman who had once been seen as elegant and sophisticated was now known as a gold digger who had preyed on a widowed father and abused his children. She could not show her face anywhere without encountering people who knew what she had done and who were disgusted by her behavior. The isolation that Patricia experienced was poetic justice. The woman who had spent years isolating Tommy and me from our father now found herself completely alone, rejected by everyone who had once considered her a friend. She had to move to a different state to escape the shame and judgment of people who knew her story. Meanwhile, Tommy and I were finally able to rebuild our relationship with our father during his recovery period. As his health improved and he was no longer under Patricia's influence, he began to see clearly what had happened to his family. He was horrified to learn about the abuse Tommy and I had suffered and devastated to realize how thoroughly he had been manipulated. Our father spent his remaining years trying to make amends for the damage that had been done. He could not undo the pain of our childhood or the years of separation, but he could acknowledge what had happened and work to rebuild the relationships that Patricia had destroyed. He was able to die peacefully, surrounded by the children he loved, and knowing that his family had been restored. The final twist in Patricia's downfall came 5 years after our father's death. She had been living modestly in another state, working for the first time in decades because the settlement money had not been enough to maintain her previous lifestyle. She was struggling with health problems of her own, and had no family or friends to support her during this difficult time. Patricia reached out to Tommy and me, hoping that we might be willing to help her in her time of need. She had convinced herself that enough time had passed for us to forgive her actions, and that we might feel some obligation to assist our former stepmother. Her letter was pathetic and desperate. She claimed that she had always loved us, and had only been trying to help our father create a stable family environment. She said that she regretted any misunderstandings that had occurred and hoped that we could move forward as a family. She asked for financial help with her medical bills, and suggested that she could come to live near one of us, so that we could spend time together and rebuild our relationship. Tommy and I discussed Patricia's request and came to a unanimous decision. We sent her a brief response that delivered the final blow to the woman who had spent years destroying our family. Dear Patricia, we received your letter asking for our help and forgiveness. We want you to know that we remember everything you did to us as children, and everything you did to our father. We remember the psychological abuse, the manipulation, the isolation, and the theft. We remember how you turned our father against us, and how you abandoned him the moment he became inconvenient. We have built good lives despite the damage you caused, and we have no desire to have you in them. You taught us that family is not about blood or legal relationships, but about love, loyalty, and care. You showed us none of these things, so you are not our family. We hope you find peace in your remaining years, but you will not find it with us. The mercy you receive from us is the same mercy you showed us as children. Janet and Tommy. Patricia's attempt to manipulate us one final time had failed completely. The children she had tried to destroy had grown up to become strong, successful, and happy despite her best efforts to break us. We had found peace and healing through our own resilience and the support of the families we had created. Patricia spent her final years alone, facing the consequences of a lifetime of cruelty and manipulation. She had no children to care for her, no friends to comfort her, and no family to mourn her when she eventually passed away. She had destroyed every relationship in her life in pursuit of money and control, and in the end she died with neither. The woman who had thought she could erase us from our father's life and steal our inheritance learned that children remember everything, that justice may be delayed but is rarely denied, and that the cruelty you show to others will eventually be returned to you in full measure. This story serves as a powerful reminder that child abuse has lasting consequences, that financial manipulation is a form of theft, and that people who prey on the vulnerable will eventually face justice. Patricia spent years believing that she had won, only to discover that her victims had grown up to become her judges, and they found her guilty on all counts. The most satisfying part of this revenge was that Tommy and I did not have to become cruel or vindictive to achieve justice. We simply refused to enable Patricia's continued abuse and manipulation. We protected our father when she abandoned him. We exposed her crimes when she tried to steal from him. And we denied her the forgiveness and support she had never earned. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to be a victim anymore, and allowing the abuser to face the natural consequences of their actions. If this story of a wicked stepmother's ultimate downfall left you completely satisfied and craving more justice, then you have found your perfect home here at Revenge Janet. This is exactly the type of content we live for. Stories where childhood trauma transforms into adult strength, where abusers face the consequences of their cruelty, and where karma delivers the most devastating blows imaginable. Hit that subscribe button right now because we upload new revenge stories regularly that will keep you on the edge of your seat and leave you feeling completely vindicated. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story of evil stepmothers, manipulative family members, and vindictive people getting exactly what they deserve. Share this story with anyone who has ever dealt with toxic family dynamics or stepfamily drama, and join our community of survivors who know that justice always finds a way. Welcome to Revenge Janet, where the abused become the victorious, and the wicked always get their comeuppance.